Hi, everyone. I am Anna Baker, the marketing manager at Vanderbloemen, and leading today's discussion, we have Chantel McHenry, our senior manager of operations, leading this discussion on what discipleship and connections have looked like since COVID-19. This has been an area of huge disruption with small groups and discipleship and outreach, but we've also had the opportunity to see a lot of creativity in this area. So I'm really excited to see what these panelists have to share with us today about what they've been doing at their churches. We would love for today's conversation to be really engaging. So if you have questions, please drop those in the comments below and we will get to those at the end of today's discussion. With that, I will hand it over to you, Chantel.
Thanks so much, Anna, and welcome everybody to today's webinar. We're so happy to be able to bring this great group of panelists to you today. So I'm just going to start off with introductions. And Ashley, why don't you start off? Tell us who you are, what church you're with, what your position is, and then just a little bit about your church, maybe the size, kind of where you're located, and are you open or closed?
Yeah, thanks, Chantel.
Yeah.
My name is Ashley Spoker. I am the Executive Director of Groups in Nashville, Tennessee. And our church, Midtown Fellowship, is not yet open for corporate worship, but when we are, we have 4 separate congregations that meet all throughout Nashville, ranging in size from 150 people up to about 1,200 people. And then, of course, like everyone else, there's always that. And we're in the middle of trying to do something else. And so we have a 5th congregation that we were hoping to plant this fall. So everything's, who knows?
Just wow. Well, Nashville is booming too. I was there a few months ago, right before COVID hit. I was there with another colleague, and we were launching a search that we did for church there in Nashville. So you guys are like growing and booming and just beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Aaron?
Yes, absolutely. My name is Aaron Moore. I serve as the Director of Ministry at Concord Church here in Dallas, Texas. We're a body of about 10,000 members with just one location in South Dallas. And we have been closed since early March when everything got really serious with COVID-19. And like everyone else in the country, we are trying to figure it out. And we've had to adjust. And so our congregation has now turned into our virtual congregation. So that's where we are right now.
And were you guys online already?
Yes. So we had some, we did have an online presence already. But so we had some things in place, but the shift has caused us to ramp everything up and just shift everything completely that way. But
yeah. And then Ryan, how about you?
Hey, my name is Ryan Sidholm, and I'm a church planter and pastor at River City Church in Vancouver, Washington, which is in America, not Canada. We're in the Portland, Oregon metropolitan area, and our church just celebrated its 1-year anniversary during shutdown. And so we run about 75 on a Sunday right now, and we are still 100% online.
Well, we're so glad to have you, Ryan, because you are going to be able to speak to what we call the normal sized church at Vanderbloemen. We have a lot of people that tune in and listen, and they're like, I am not the mega church of the world, and we just need someone that has a perspective of what to do with the normal sized church. So thank you so much for joining us today. So you guys are pretty key in discipleship at your churches. And so I would like for you to each talk a little bit about what were you doing for small group discipleship prior to COVID-19? And then what kind of shifts and pivots did you make once we all had to shut down and kind of stay at home and go virtual? So Ryan, I'd love to start with you if you could kick that conversation off.
Yeah, so we had our discipleship groups, and that's what we called them. We just called them discipleship groups. And in each one, we kept it around 10 or less. And what they would do is they would meet during the week to discuss, what the message was about this previous week or something else. But one of the things we would always do is it's 90 minutes each. This is what they were. And they would be 30 minutes on head, 30 minutes on heart, 30 minutes on hands. And
Nice.
and so that was before COVID, and we had maybe about 17% of our church involved in these discipleship groups. And it's funny because I was praying, I said, God, give us a way to increase these discipleship groups. And the Lord sent us a pandemic. And so our small group discipleship groups grew from 17% engagement to 76% engagement.
Huge.
So instead of just, we don't just do a Facebook Live broadcast, but we have all these people meeting in what we're now calling less than 10 gatherings. And so we made that shift. And part of it was, as a church plant in the Pacific Northwest, we try to be more missional and more proactive than we are reactive. And so this wasn't because of COVID, it was because we want a focus on the global persecuted church who can't gather in group, and not for fear of a virus, but for fear of physical or social persecution. So that's what we're doing now.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now tell your 3 H's again: hand, heart,
Head, heart, hands. Yeah.
Love that.
Head, heart, hands.
Love that. All right, Ashley, how about you?
Yeah, I love hearing that, Ryan, that less than 10 groups. I mean, just call it what it is, right? Just, so our groups ministry met on a weekly basis. Our groups range in size from 4 to 16 members. They're always open. So that's why we kind of have that 16 number at the top, is because we want groups to be continually pulling new members and friends into the group with them. And then to branch at the point in which we say, okay, now the group is overflowing, we're a little too large. And so that's why we have that big range. You're kind of never too small, but you kind of can get too big. And certainly with COVID, you can get too big. So we already have that weekly rhythm of meeting in homes. And once we shifted to virtual, everyone just hit a hard pause. And we immediately started equipping our group leaders to use Zoom or Google or whatever platform they chose. We didn't choose for them necessarily. We just used my discipleship director team to really help leaders decide, hey, what's the virtual platform that your group is going to switch to? Because we then also provide, and we have been doing this, a weekly curriculum that we also use Head, Heart, Hands. And it's a collaboration between the pastoral team and my group's team. And it's written around the scripture passage for each sermon. And so after you hear the sermon, you then have these reflection questions that as a group you discuss that are really looking at that observation, internalizing, and then application of the word. And so we continued providing that curriculum for all groups after the shift to virtual was made.
That's great. So normally when you were not offline, but online, did you normally take a break your groups over the summer? Because I know some churches normally would kind of take a little break and then come back in the fall.
We did. And so, because that was so much of our rhythm, and really because we felt like our group leaders had shouldered a lot of the care burden in that COVID lockdown time, that we still really encouraged leaders. And we use a system of kind of directors and coaches to help care for our leaders. We really stepped in and said, hey, obviously, as the church, we need to see one another be together in either a virtual way or not. But we also encourage rest. And so let's think creatively about what rest as a leader looks like when you really are the primary person helping shepherd this group of people. And so we really helped brainstorm, how can you give ownership away? How can you give other people tasks that they can keep the group going throughout the summer? How can you set a schedule early in the summer where you'll have some weeks off? Really encouraging creativity around knowing we've built our group's model in a way that we actually encourage people to take a rest and step away. And so just because we're in COVID, that doesn't negate the need for that rest. And so trying to be creative about helping people continue to do that, but not being willing to let people get lost in the summer and just float off your radar.
Yeah, I love that. Just continuing that discipleship, which, as you stated, is so, so needed in this season as people are encountering all types of hardship in their life, emotionally, spiritually, physically, financially, and the church still being able to be there in service, even during what we would traditionally be our summer off months, right?
Yeah.
And Aaron, how about you?
Yeah. So groups at Concord has kind of always been in the DNA of the church. It's a 45-year-old church. We made 45 years this year. And from our founding pastor to our current senior pastor, groups has been in the DNA. So when you look at our discipleship plan holistically, it breaks down into 5 areas: prayer, worship, grow, serve, and give. And what grow is, that's kind of where our grow groups sit within. That's the discipleship arm of the church. And so what we were doing prior to COVID, all of our groups would kind of sit underneath their individual ministries, which were based upon seasons of life. So we had women's groups, we had men's groups, we had young adult groups, couples groups, singles groups, in these various areas. And every single one of those, the directors of those particular ministries would kind of be in charge of kind of shepherding the group leaders within that space, right? So he or she would pastor the individual leaders there, and they would all have their own kind of individual curriculum. So our women's groups were going through an amazing book called Seamless. Men's, we were going through Disciplines of a Godly Man. Our couples group we were all going through different books at the time, different curriculums, but we all launched at the same time and we ended at the same time.
Okay.
And we had seasons of rest. So we had 3 primary group seasons throughout. Well, while we were in the toward the close of our first group season, we had seen kind of historic numbers with, close to 40% of the church within groups. That may not sound like a lot, but in a body of about 10,000, it's a ton of groups taking place at the same time. And so what happened, basically, the groups were to last the second week in February to the third week in March. That was our first grow group season. Well, the first week in March is when COVID hit and we had to make a complete shift. So we kind of emailed everything out, and the shift that we made, we took a break because, like everyone else, we were trying to recalibrate and get things back together. The shift that we made was, instead of every individual group having a different curriculum, we all came around what's now our sermon-based curriculum. Mm-hmm. So when our pastor, what the teaching team preaches on Sunday, we have our teaching team come together with questions, with points. We haven't made it to the head, heart, and hands, which I love that. So this is why we collaborate. It's why you have good friends. You bring it back to your individual areas. But we would take that, and it's like, okay, so now how does this sermon apply to couples, to young adults, and so now the entire church is in alignment on what we're studying right now. And there's one kind of unified voice that's going through, and we're all kind of continuing on within our groups project. The last thing is this has kind of been pre-COVID and even within COVID now. Every small group has an assignment of putting together some type of evangelistic or outreach project within their group. So every single group has a responsibility to do that. And we've been able to continue that during COVID in certain places. So it looks like either serving at our food pantry, serving in certain places within our communities that are offering opportunities to do so. So that's kind of how we've shifted throughout this season.
And since you've mentioned outreach, let's talk about that just a little bit, because traditionally in most churches, during the summer months, that is an opportunity where small groups or large groups are deployed in their cities to do serve day projects, maybe for a whole day or for the weekend, or a church is sending groups of missionaries overseas to for humanitarian and or evangelistic type projects. So how are you at Concord? Talk a little bit more about your outreach What does that look like? How have you employed or deployed your missionaries that are more accustomed to going boots on the ground overseas, but now they're boots on the ground here in the States? So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So right now during this season, everything in terms of mission and evangelism and serve, they're kind of combined to deploy efforts within our community. We sit in South Dallas, which is primary African American, primary Latino community, and a very underserved community. So we sit in the middle of a food desert, right?
Mm.
And so we have a nonprofit organization called Harmony CDC that has free legal aid, free mental health with our counselors. We have a food pantry there, and also a clothing closet that we offer there. So basically, a lot of our evangelistic efforts have been, not to mention on top of the African American and Latino community being having the highest numbers of COVID-19 cases, right?
Mm-hmm.
And having a lack of access to testing areas. So what we've kind of shifted everything to is serving our community and meeting a need there. And so we've deployed people. So now our food pantry has gone from seeing 200 people a week to now seeing close to 700 people a week, right?
Wow.
So it's gone from, everything that we've had to do has had to shift toward, not just a global reach, but since we can't go global, there are a ton of needs that have to take place that are visible within our community. And so we've deployed our missionaries, our groups to serve right where we are. And not to mention some of our racial reconciliation efforts within what are taking place right now. So Pastor Carter has been on the front lines. And this is something that Concord has been on the front lines with for years. Dr. Chantel, I'm a history guy. So our founding pastor, Dr. E.K. Bailey, in the early 90s released a book with Warren Wiersbe called Preaching in Black and White. And it's all about racial reconciliation within the church. And now Dr. Carter and another pastor here in Dallas, Texas, named Jeff Warren, we do what's called a pulpit swap every year. Jeff Warren, pastors Park Cities, which is a large, primarily white Southern Baptist church in the city. They've become good friends throughout the years. And what we've done as well is we have kind of deployed these prayer gatherings that have taken place to champion racial reconciliation and social change. They're kind of geared around five primary areas: economic change, education, healthcare, criminal justice reform. And these areas are where we're deploying our people, all of our missionaries, to make sure they place their efforts in. So I hope that it's like a long-winded answer. So
no, that's fantastic, and I appreciate you bringing up, because not only are we dealing with COVID-19, we are definitely dealing with the racial reconciliation that really starts in the church and communities rising up in our churches, and that is part of discipleship. And so that's a great point that you made. So Ryan, what about you guys? Do you normally have summer outreaches? Was that part of your plan, and what does it look like now?
Yeah, so we do have a lot of summer outreach, but it's not just summer, it's year long. And so in our first year alone as a church plant, we averaged 75 people. We had over 4,000 volunteer hours logged into the community.
Oh, how wonderful.
Year. And so for us, that's a major change. But being a church plant, we were also the recipient of a lot of mission teams. And so we had 12 mission teams scheduled to come in and help us bless the city this year. And every single one of those has been canceled. And so that throws a wrench in things, but also we're trying to figure out how do we serve our community. And so our community, so where I am, I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee, which is very black and white as far as racially. Up here, it's 2% African American. Yeah. And that's so small, right? But it's 26% Hispanic. And so there's the racial, stuff there. So we've planted a multi-ethnic church that reaches across those lines. And one of the things we're doing is our service projects, it's shifting from looking like one big project led by me to multiple small projects led by everyday believers, right? We're kind of, spreading out that way. And the part of the city that our church building sits in is within a 20-minute walk, there's about 1,000 homeless individuals. That's a lot.
Sure
and
is.
so when COVID first hit, food pantries, were such a need, but I saw everybody meet that need in my community so fast. It's like everybody did food pantries, but then I was like, well, if I don't want to do a food pantry and then just become white noise, And so we prayed about how we could bless the homeless community, since there's 1,000 of them in a 20-minute walk, and all of a sudden the place where they use the bathroom and wash their hands was shut down, fast food restaurants, right? And so we pivoted pretty quickly, and we partnered with 2 nonprofits in the city that are not faith-based, the Mental Health Association of Portland and Community Services of Southwest Washington, and we turned our parking lot into a homeless pit stop.
Awesome.
So we had the cleanest bathrooms in the city, because it was 3 porta potties, 2 hand washing stations, and a shower trailer. And after every single use, volunteers would go in and sanitize after every single use. And so just this quarter alone, we've been in this entire quarter we've been in COVID, but we've still been able to log 948 volunteer hours into the community in just this 3 months. And so it's trying to find ways to, instead of making me the hero, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dave Ferguson of Exponential, but using his language, how do I make others heroes? How do I make heroes? How do I become a hero maker? And so that's what our service project have really looked like at this point. It's adjusting and pivoting to have multiple service projects, but they're smaller,
Wow, I love
Great.
that idea. I mean, that concept of just creating bathrooms and hand washing stations right there at your facility. I love the creativity that God is giving each and every church during this season, because the heart of the church has always been the community. And I think that as a result of having to deal with this pandemic, that the focus is going back to the immediate community that church sits in, and being able to serve them and serve them well. So I love that. And Ashley, what are you guys doing in Nashville?
So our church has not had a rhythm of big outreach projects necessarily during the summer. And there's I really think a foundational belief that relationships are what bring gospel transformation and change in the lives of believers and non-believers the same. And so I think we've always had a just foundation of relationship, relational evangelism. And so our neighbors, I think, have been the places that us as church members have really been encouraged to continue to turn toward our neighbors, to deepen those relationships, to now we have all this time, let's have those conversations that are going to get to a place of spiritual vulnerability and really be able to share our hearts with one another. If you're not aware, Nashville also had an enormous tornado right at the end of February. And so really right before lockdown, we had a huge tornado come through and really, really destroy a lot of the city. And so that week, right before lockdown, we were covering roofs, we were pulling up debris, we were mobilizing as much as we could around helping our church members and then just their connections with individuals who needed help, either with places to stay, with meals, with whatever we could around that disaster, as well as began gathering funds in order to pass them to another church in North Nashville where there was like just a ton of damage sustained, so that they would have ongoing funds for the needs that would be past those initial needs. And so that effort of having funds available for where the needs would be met was continued throughout COVID, so that we created on our website a I need help button and a I'd like to help button so that we're just kind of making people aware of, hey, the church, we're here to help one another, and you're one or the other of those two people. You can help or you need help. And so making that just open. I think our groups too, we have a pretty intentional connection with coaches and elders for our small group leaders. And so really massaging into the DNA, hey, group leader, you're not alone to help care for and shepherd your church members and their connections. You know, use your elders, use this chain of people to help care for the people that you're in charge of. So really trying to not be an island of just individuals caring for our neighbors, but to ask people to pray, to ask people to step into those places with us, so that we are really just covering Nashville with the truth of the gospel. And I do think, I will say, Nashville, our mayor has a pretty different stance than the surrounding counties regarding the speed of which Nashville will reopen. And so I do think one thing that we have said, not meeting for corporate worship is a way for us to love our city right now. And we've been really overt about that and say, you know, it might not be our exact community that's receiving the biggest hit. Like Aaron said, it is Black and brown folks that are really getting a lot more diagnoses. And so how do we care for people well? How are we loving our neighbor through the way that we're interacting around this virus?
That's phenomenal. I think all of you have taken the opportunity to really show that the Lord can use whatever, right? The Bible says that what the enemy has meant for evil, that he would turn for good. And I love seeing and hearing how you all have taken this very horrific pandemic that has not just impacted us, but has impacted the world. But still, you have risen to be the hands and feet of Jesus, and to, as Ryan is doing, empowering individuals, and Ashley and Aaron, you guys are empowering your membership to continue to disciple and pastor the rest of the membership. Because typically on a Sunday after the message, people would probably get together, go out to eat, talk about the message, and that's not available anymore. So being able to provide notes from the sermon, scriptures from the sermon, and creating small groups to kind of gather and talk about that is just fantastic. So let me ask you, since we've gone to this kind of online model where we are virtually having small groups and discipleship type events, have you seen an increase? I think most of you have said so, but have you seen an increase in the attendance for your small group gatherings and discipleship type events? Ryan?
Yeah. So yes, we have, and but we've seen an increase in both believers and non-believers that are attracted to our ministry. And I was, as I was trying to figure this out, I really think that the increase in believers has been because we as a church have taken a firm stand on where we stand with stuff like racial inequality. And I know several churches that are staying silent right now. And, people may not be leaving those churches because they're silent, but I guarantee you nobody's looking for a silent church, And so because we've taken a strong stance on, on being Jesus to our community, we've attracted some other believers. But then what's interesting is the non-believers we've attracted. And this has been a really big mindset shift for me, because we're not attracting the people that we're serving. We're attracting the people that we're serving with. And so we've opened the door for other, anybody in the city could come volunteer, like at the pit stop. And as I'm serving with those people at the pit stop who are non-believers is when I get to engage in conversation. And so now in our ministry, I want to talk about three specific people that we haven't, that are extremely engaged. One of them's a Satanist who used to dabble in Buddhism. One of them's an atheist, and one of them's a witch. She's practicing Wicca. But all three of those are really engaged in our ministry, because just like the Bible tells us, we are a city on a hill whose light cannot be hidden. We're not hiding our light. And when you shine a bright light, one of the things we say is you're going to attract some bugs, right?
I like that.
And so we've been unapologetic, as unbelievers are attracted to our ministry. We're not figuring like, oh, how can we get them to be our friend first before we talk about Jesus? For us, it's like, hey, this might be the only chance we get, so we're going to give you Jesus right now. And so we've had these people engaged for almost the entirety of COVID now, they're there every single week contributing to the conversation. When we open up talking about our heart, what do you feel like God is teaching you this week? And they answer, and they talk about what they feel like the Holy Spirit is doing in their lives and the prayers that they're starting to pray to God, even though they're still not believers. So it's been really cool to see that.
And do you think that they feel comfortable now because the four walls of the church, the brick and mortar, is no longer in existence, if you will?
Absolutely. And we've been a little bit different. We're a young church, and that's never been a problem for us, because one of our unique rhythms that we do is we cancel our Sunday service once a month. And that's something that we did from the very beginning. Once a month, we canceled our worship service to do service as worship instead. And so we would literally still meet at the building, but then basically just to put gloves on and then go out on a Sunday morning and pick up trash in our community. And so from the very beginning, we've never been confined to our four walls. And so that's been something that's been attractive to several non-believers who are looking at the church saying, hey, you're not putting your money where your mouth is. Well, we've been able to be different in that sense. So it's been really exciting. So
Fantastic. Ashley, what are you guys seeing when it comes to engagement and on the believer and the non-believer side?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And Ryan, I think that's so beautiful to have reimagined church outside of that four walls. We definitely saw an increase in engagement. I think, honestly, we had a lot of people say, oh, I've been meaning to join a group for forever, and now is just my chance. Great. We're so glad to have you. And then we had others from all over the country actually who had found our website and like, hey, can we get in now that this is virtual? And like, oh, you're really expanding my definition of church now. And then definitely even from within our community, people realizing, oh, this is the way that I will continue to have accountability and people to celebrate with, people to be sorrowful with. This will create for me the Christian community that I might just be like dipping my toe in on Sunday morning, but here's a way that is actual community and experiencing what the Lord has called us to in relationship. So we did see some growth there for sure. And I think to the point of, I love that, Chantel, like the church, the walls kind of disappearing. I think one thing that has been helpful is that for a lot of our believers, there's not this idea of I'm just waiting until the right moment to invite someone. It's sort of like the moment is here. What else are we going to wait on? So now, invite them to group, let them jump in. We're not waiting for some, the outreach service at church or whatever it is, but it's just an all the time kind of thing. So we've seen a lot of people bringing guests to join in the conversation. I do think it will be interesting, and I think we will get to this once we start talking about when will we meet face to face again and what will that look like, and really helping people navigate the spectrum of how comfortable people are going to be with face-to-face and how many people in the room, and how can we in a mature way actually help people walk through some conflict because of that spectrum of difference and disagreement. Can we as the church actually become kind of relational ninjas as we help people be able to talk about ways in which they see the world differently and still be in relationship together?
Mm-hmm. And Aaron, will you speak to that same question, but then also pivot us into, so we're going to talk about the engagement, what it looks like now, new believers, non-believers, your existing believers, but then shift to what does it look like when, as Ashley said, you start forward thinking towards when we do get back into our brick and mortar churches. Do we continue this very engaged online community, and does it couple with what we do normally in person? So if you could talk about both of those and shift us into that conversation.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I would say one of the things we've learned as a church staff and a team is that people are more willing to give to be engaged with movements as opposed to institutions. And what people have kind of viewed the church as for a long time, especially here in the Bible Belt, is that this is this institution that we come to, that we get service from. But what exactly is this movement that's taking place? And we know as Bible believers that Christianity has always been a movement. It's always been a movement that's been going upstream while the rest of the world is going in a different direction, right? And so we have seen our reach be expanded point blank through a church our size, there's so many entryways within the life of our church, right? Through small groups, through Bible studies, but the big entryway have been twofold. One is our community outreach. A lot of our service projects, a lot of the things that we've been doing within the community has gained notoriety, both in the state of Texas and nationally. Prior to COVID-19 happening, we did what was called, we call it the Grand Wedding, something we do every 3 years for cohabitating couples. Is we issue a challenge. We say, hey, if we want what's best for you, and if you can go through this cohabitation challenge, go through our premarital class, we will pay for your wedding and your reception. You can have it at the church. And if you don't want to live that way anymore, we will give you want to move out, we will give you your first 2 months rent right now. And so that's one of the things that we've been able to do. And so that gained notoriety. It gained a lot of notoriety. So we got an influx of people who were interested in those things. Same thing with our food pantry, same thing with our free legal aid. All of those things has been kind of an entryway to the non-believer because of this holistic view toward ministry, right? Same thing with racial reconciliation. To Ryan's point earlier, people are not looking for a silent church in this season. And everything that we present is that we are navigating in the midst of two pandemics, right? We're navigating in the midst of two pandemics, and we want to be able to serve people throughout both of them. So with our things moving online, we now know we've seen something incredible happen. We've learned that people are more vulnerable in their living room on a Zoom call than they will ever be inside of a church, right? And so with that taking place, we've seen people come to Jesus within these groups. We've seen people all throughout the world. We have marriage classes, we have discipleship classes, people that are not believers saying, oh, there's this class that's taking place. One of the classes that we're launching in September is What is the Bible? And it's just a conversation about how the Bible as we know it came to be. And the registration is through the roof, because one of the things that we're seeing is that all of our classes and discipleship projects, we're seeing about 15 to 20% of the people being non-members. And that's been an amazing thing that we were not able to do within the life of the church. So now as we pivot toward moving back toward what planning looks like in the future, here's the pivot point. The word is just the conjunction and. Now we're thinking about ways of how can we do four things. How can we provide content, connectivity, care, and creativity in this season? Because, Barna released the statistics that 70-something% of people won't feel comfortable coming to church until there's a vaccine, right? And so we've kind of accepted the reality that this is the new normal. This is going to be the new normal. So everything that we do moving forward is we have to offer an and to that, a virtual and. And so part of us, we believe that part of being good shepherds and good stewards to our community is keeping the building closed, because primarily we want to make sure that people are safe and people are healthy. But what we have seen is an overwhelming response to the care that my church really cares for me. They don't want to put me in a vulnerable position, but we've offered things to them. So we did one of the things we've offered things for the most vulnerable populations within our church, which are our seniors, our single parents who vulnerable in a different way. And all of our service projects have been geared toward that. And we've just seen an overwhelming response to it. So to answer the question, how are we planning to pivot back in the church? We're not going to lead the way in moving back in our building. But we will lead the way on is always providing a virtual option for our people and being honest about it. As long as we'll come back in the building when it's safe for you, because we can't, in good conscience, consider ourselves to be good shepherds and good stewards of this opportunity that we have by allowing you to come back in the building. So it may be 2021. We don't know, but we're getting comfortable living in this space.
Yeah, and I appreciate that all three of you have that perspective and heart. I think Ashley said that's one of the ways we're loving and serving our community is by not having church inside the building, and we're not confined to the four walls. And I think we're learning that. We've talked about it so much in church that we are more than just this brick and mortar, but I think in this season we are actually doing it, and we were forced to do it. It's been fantastic to watch. And even with your church, Aaron, because I follow Concord Church, even though I'm in Houston, you guys pivoted quickly. I mean, I saw you doing outreach immediately when we went into, we were just in maybe the first couple of weeks of lockdown, and you guys are already out in your parking lot and serving your community. It's just fantastic. I'm going to invite Anna to come back on and check in with us and see what kind of Q&As we might have that's coming up.
Yes, we've had a lot of engagement and a lot of questions, so we will get through as many as possible. But I want to start with one that's actually not really about the COVID situation, but more about how you guys determine who's going to be in your small groups. So do you divide it by age? Do you divide it by gender, geographic location? And I think this was while Pastor Aaron was talking, so we'll let you start, Pastor Aaron.
Yeah, so we have now we've pivoted to season of life. So prior to COVID-19, it had everything to do with, there's a number of options: geographic location, season of life, interests. But now that we've shifted to more of a sermon-based curriculum and everything is completely virtual, we deploy a certain number of leaders that we've trained, going through kind of our virtual row group training. And whatever stage of life that they fit into, that they volunteer for, that's kind of how we make a selection. So when you register, when you go online, you can select couples, women's, young adults, singles, men. That's kind of how we select. And it's when you click the button, based upon the time slot that you want as well. I don't want to call it forced fellowship, but it's an opportunity to grow in sanctification. And getting to know somebody. So you got a new leader that you're introduced to, but it's an opportunity to connect. So that's how we select. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Ashley, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, our groups are pretty much all mixed, age, stage, everything, gender is all mixed together. So the primary way that we would like for people to connect is, we used to say, with the people they worship with on Sunday morning. So congregational groups. So if we ask that people be a member of a group that's a part of their congregation, because that's also one of the ways that our pastors and elders and discipleship directors care for those people. That's kind of our care tree. And so we don't want people to mix too much and then we lose relationships and then we're not as aware of where the needs are. And so that's the way that we do ask people. But otherwise, we also have everything available online where you would choose your congregation and then be able to pick your night of the week, time, and area of town where the group group would meet physically so that you can just reach out to the leader and join a group pretty immediately. And everybody is kind of mixed in all together.
Awesome. So Ryan, is it any different in a newer and smaller branch, or is it about the same for you guys?
Well, we just have one qualifying question, is that's when are you available to meet? And so other than that, it's super diverse. Our groups are really diverse. So
Awesome. Yeah, I've heard this question a lot lately, so hopefully that helps some of you out there listening.
Can I add one more element too? We also have a group dynamic for our youth and our children as well. And that's typically on one night. And what we try to do with all of our events for our adults, we try to have some type of virtual children's experience as well that couples with those things. So we're able to minister kind of to the whole family.
That's awesome. Perfect. Thank you, guys. So another question that we got is about the fall. So first of all, we know that things are a little bit uncertain for the fall, and plans might change. So it's kind of a two-part question. One, how are you planning for the fall with, government mandates shifting all the time? And two, as of right now, do you think that when you reopen church, will you try to have mostly in-person small groups again, or are you going to keep them online for a good amount of time?
Yeah, I can start with this one. We are essentially aiming. We're aiming for September 13th in whatever way we can. So primarily for our groups to start, we need trained leaders, and we want to have open space to make sure that there are plenty of options for new people to join our groups. And so right now is when we're doing the training and recruiting conversations and all of those care conversations with current leaders around whether they're continuing. So that essentially we want to start September 13th with our weekly meetings again. And we've not said yet they're starting virtually or in person, but that's kind of our launch date for publishing curriculum so that everyone has a rough idea. And I think as far as whether we will encourage in-person or virtual meetings, I really think the thing that I've learned throughout COVID is smaller is better for ministry, because it takes away some of the physical barriers to actually meeting in person. But our philosophy so far has been to leave for leader discretion. If they and their group are much more comfortable meeting in a virtual way, then we will support them doing that. And if they have a smaller group and everyone is comfortable meeting in person, then we would leave that up to them and let them have kind of, because these are in homes, we're kind of letting people assume some of that risk and responsibility. And that's what I was alluding to earlier, helping people navigate some of those conversations where they may encounter a spectrum of these are going to be hard conversations where they're going to encounter that spectrum of opinion as to how to re-engage and when, and really helping people push through with some really good biblical, resolution of conflict ideas of, speaking with truth and love, coming with a lot of grace, where people are going to feel probably pretty passionate.
Yeah, that is a great point of what do you do when half of the group is more comfortable at home, or maybe they have kids that aren't back in school and they don't have daycare options. And then the other half of the group is like, no, we're ready to meet in person. So I love that idea of it's an opportunity for healthy conflict and those hard conversations in the way we're supposed to handle them as Christians. So that's awesome. What about you, Aaron?
Yeah, we are encouraging for our groups, classes, and what we're calling virtual gatherings. We're encouraging everyone to remain virtual. We have seen it just provide kind of a great, as I talked about earlier, kind of expanded our reach, but also we've noticed that people have become more vulnerable. And so we're encouraging everyone to remain virtual, especially until we get we can, because of what all the up and down, everything being up in the air, with where our government stands on when we're going to reopen things. So that's what we are encouraging people to do. So our next group season launch date is supposed to be the first week in October. And in September, we're doing we're doing a virtual Bible study class on, as I mentioned earlier. And in the month of August, we're going to do some roundtable discussions around racial reconciliation, around those big 5 topics that we talked about. So we're encouraging virtual until things are safe.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for some of those practical ideas of other things that people can do kind of while we're waiting for things to be able to reopen safely. We have a lot going on right now that we can use to teach and disciple, even if it is online for a bit.
Yeah.
And Ryan?
Yeah. So I think when we're talking about this in our context, we think a little bit differently, and it's kind of like, when can we get back to normal? I feel like, if after Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses on the cathedral door, the Catholic Church was saying, hey, when can we get back to normal, right? And the ones who got back to normal were on the wrong side of the Reformation.
Right.
And so, like, I think we're not going to go back to what we know as normal. And just to tell you kind of what we're thinking here, in Acts 1:8, Jesus said, you will be my witnesses. You will go to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to into the earth. Well, in Acts 8:1 is when we see that happen. And the believers were scattered to Judea and Samaria, except for the apostles. So the church leaders, they still stayed at church. They still stayed at home base. But it was the normal, everyday believers that went out to Judea, which I feel like is our neighborhoods, and Samaria, which is, I feel like, across those racial boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're trying to do is say, how can we equip the everyday believer? We talk a lot about the priesthood of all believers, but that's more theory than it is practice in a lot of churches. And so we want to bring that to practice. And so, short answer, we're not going back to normal. Like, we've got to. And so, instead of like in 2020, I have no doubt 2020 is going to be in our church history books. And if the greatest accomplishment that the church made in 2020 was they moved online, I feel like we failed, right? And so, instead of moving into the World Wide Web, we're saying, how do we move into the whole wide world, right?
That's
right. Believers. So
I can just piggyback on that, what Ryan said. When in Acts, when it says that the church went from house to house, we have an incredible capability. We have to reimagine what, in the Great Commission, what go means from a virtual space. Yeah. We have to reimagine what it means to go and to make disciples. We can go from house to house to the public square with a ring light and a cell phone. Yeah. And it's an incredible thing to be able to witness. And, as crazy as 2020 has been, I quote the song lyrics, it's been a great time to be alive.
Yeah. Well, and also too, it's like taking advantage of what we can do. So right now in Washington State, we can gather with 5 people that are outside our family. So you better believe I'm going to start having people over to my backyard. Hey, let's do a barbecue. Yes. Right? And then get together with 5 people, then just tell them, all right, now you go do the same in your community.
Yep.
That's awesome. So on a similar note, I'm wondering how you guys are planning on connecting people that maybe have joined your church virtually once you do reopen, or once you do start connecting people a little bit more locally. If people have joined your online services or online small groups from far away and they can't attend in person, do you plan on kind of continuing an online presence to keep those people engaged? Do you plan on trying to connect those people to a local church maybe in their area? Do you know yet? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I feel that, I really feel like there's still a big question mark there for us. I mean, I think that is such, if we, our church, I really feel like is founded on this idea of neighbors helping neighbors being connected to neighbors, right? And I mean, such an excellent point that Aaron made is that, okay, now we're expanding our idea of who even is my neighbor. There's this whole wide world now that we have access to and that have access to us as the church. And I think there's some really great philosophical questions there about how we do care for and connect with people that we're limited only to a digital connection with. And what does that look like? I really appreciate this encouragement to not consider digital connections to be subpar. I think that's been a little bit of the language that I've been hearing even in our own community is, well, it was just Zoom. And I think, gosh, no, like how many more people were engaged because it was Zoom, or how many, and like even Aaron was pointing out, how much more vulnerable were people willing to be because it was this medium that kind of shook them out of their normal. And so I really want the church to start embracing digital communication as a way in which we can form real relationship. Now, will we have things that we will have to battle through and walls that we'll have to break down in that context? Of course, in the same way we would in face-to-face relationships, but that really kind of helping the church move into and embrace a digital community rather than just backpedaling into the way things were.
Awesome. I love that.
Anna, our virtual community is here to stay. We were already online in part prior to COVID. And as Chantel, we said earlier, this kind of pushed us into a full-fledged online campus. So now what we have on Sundays is we have a team that we have deployed that are active and online within our chat. And we have links set up, a connect link, a prayer link, an accept Christ link, and a join our church link, right? And so when you click the prayer link, we have virtual, basically a virtual prayer room after service that you can go to. We're able to call you and have individual prayer. If you want to accept Christ, we've got people. So now everything that we've done, we've got some decision counselors that are able to have a conversation with you. And we are committed to keeping this online campus to increase our global impact, our global reach. Because one of the things that we witnessed, and I'm an old school guy, all the stuff. I was definitely one of those people. Let me just be honest and just say, oh man, maybe virtual may be a bit subpar, until I had an encounter with God on a Zoom call, a virtual prayer call, where, and it's just like, how cynical of me. If God can show up in a prison cell with Paul and Silas, or, anywhere, why can't he show up on a Zoom call? And so that is kind of our stance, and kind of where we are as a church is we can't go back. This is the new normal. This is a part of our everyday experience, and no one loves the gathering. I'm an extrovert by nature. No one loves the foyer after church more than me, hugging folks, hanging out, all those things. But it ain't safe to do it. So now we have to create a virtual foyer. We've got to create some type of way where we can connect with people and experience the love of God and demonstrate the love of God that way. So that is kind of what our plans are.
Awesome. So cool.
I don't have anything to add to that. That's good. What Ashley and Aaron said.
Can't top it, right? Awesome. Well, with our last few minutes, I'd love to just go around and each of you tell me one thing either that you've learned in this season that you are going to carry with you for the rest of your ministry, or maybe a lesson that you've learned that you want to share with other people and leaders in your shoes that might help them if they're still struggling with the online concept.
I could start with that one. So, what we've discovered is that people's Zoom attention span is way shorter than their pew attention span. And so, and I don't think when we gather again in person, their attention span is going to magically get larger. Like, where our attention spans are stunted for the rest of our lives now. And so moving forward, one of the things we've learned is that we're gonna stay with bite-sized messages. And so one of the shifts we're making is, instead of giving a longer message and then saying amen and everyone kind of, departs from there, having a bite-sized message and then saying amen, and then afterwards them breaking on the spot into small groups to digest on the spot what they just talked about. So that's something that we've learned.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear how that goes too. I feel like that's going to be really successful. We'll have to call you in a couple months.
Sounds great.
Yeah, no, that's great. We've shifted our time in worship service, right? So it's an hour long virtual worship service now, with all the key elements that we've continued: prayer, worship, sermon, invitation, all those things. But I think there's some broad things, some general things. One, it's a quote by Bishop Paul S. Morton. He says, "Marry the mission, but date the method." And one of the worst words you can hear. Tradition is not the problem in church, but traditionalism is. And so we've kind of learned to be making sure we're clear on what the mission is and remaining married to it, right? But being flexible with the mission. I think the other thing is innovation has to meet a need. We can't. I think about we think about when the paralytic was lowered down into the roof to meet Jesus. They had to innovate a way to get the guy to Jesus because every other way was blocked off, right? And so when we innovate, we're just trying to come up with ways to get people to Jesus to meet a need, not just for innovation's sake. And three is just the basics don't change. I think that we now have an opportunity from a budget standpoint, when we evaluate things, one of the things that we notice is we spend a lot of time and energy doing church as opposed to being church. And now it's a real shift to saying, we're going to put all of our energy, effort, resources on being the church, and we can't go back. We can't go back. So those are some of the lessons that we've learned.
Awesome. I love it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think I said just earlier that smaller is better, and that the focus on relationship and intimacy with a smaller group of people will be the thing that I will continually be encouraging people toward, getting in the Word together, praying together, but doing so in a way that can't be stopped. It can't be stopped by city mandates. It can't be stopped by a virus, but it is the way in which we're going to continue to preach to one another, to preach to our hearts the gospel that we continually need and we need to hear and that the world needs.
Amen.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. I wish we had another hour because I feel like you have so much insight and wisdom to share with us. And it was just such an awesome panel. Thank you, Chantel, for hosting. And if any of you watching want to watch this again or read the insights that our panelists shared with us, we'll be posting this on our blog tomorrow. So go to vanderbloemen.com/blog and you can see this anytime.